That's all right.
Winemaking.
Oh, so that's what you do.
Yes.
Amazing.
There's
All
always
right.
those when you're filling something, when you have a tank, you're like, okay, you do the math, and it's like, okay, we're going to need, 4 500-liter punch-ins and 2 barrique, and it should work out. And then it happens, and it's like, okay, everything's full, and we have 20 gallons, and it's like, okay, well, we can fill a 15-gallon keg, and we have 5 gallons left. And what do we do with that? So, anyways, it's the constant struggle.
Well, I think we've got pretty much everyone here for the time being. So I'm going to just welcome everyone. Hi, welcome to the latest table talk with the wonderful Pax Mahle from Pax Wines. I am just keeping an eye on things this evening. So if you have any questions at all, it's super chill. So you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions along the talk. Will, the lovely Will, who many of you know, is going to be sort of like commander-in-chief when it comes to taking us on this journey with Pax today. But if you have any questions at all, please just feel free to pop them in the chat if you'd rather not unmute to ask. I'll make sure everything gets answered. But most importantly, sit back, relax. If you've got some of the mission from the Wine Club case, which is what Will and I are currently enjoying, please do crack into that. We'll be talking about that a bit later. But until then, I am going to mute myself because no one really wants to hear what I have to say. Everyone wants to hear what Pax has to say, and pass you over to Will and Pax.
Thank you. Well, so, thanks for joining us, Pax. It's I've been looking forward to this one. It's always enjoyed your wines. It's been great to have the opportunity to sell them on the sourcing table, and now
thank you very much.
The opportunity to hear your reasoning and thoughts behind them. So, do you want to just introduce yourself, Pax, and tell them?
Sure.
Tell them what. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, my name is Pax Mahle. We'll be talking about the Pax Wines, which is a winery I started with my wife in 2000. So this was our 21st vintage, 22nd vintage. This past year that we're just finishing up, just wrapping up now. Still have wine in tank. Everything's pressed off its skins, but it was a really fabulous vintage for us this year, especially coming off of last year, which not only did we have of course, the global pandemic complicating things, but the fires last year were brutal. We harvested less than a third of the amount of fruit that we were contracted for and planning to harvest. And as hard as that is for us, it's even harder for a lot of our grower partners without fire insurance and that sort of thing. So really optimistic going into this harvest, and it paid off. It was a really fantastic year for us. I also have
brilliant. No, sorry, go on, Pax, carry on.
Oh, okay. We have a new vineyard called Halcon, and we have a new brand called Halcon Estate, which is new. We've had other brands over the past that have been in the UK, like Wind Gap and Agarda, that we've sold. And then I'm a partner in Monterey Wines as well with Patrick Capiello, which I believe you guys just picked up as well. So.
Yeah, just to finally arrive to us. I mean, shipping wines from the US is not the easiest thing in the world at the moment, but they're finally here, and we actually sat in the office and tasted them last week, and they're great. They're really interesting wines, fascinating. Yeah, looking forward to having those on the website soon. So I mean, in terms of the wildfires, Pax, how does that affect? Is it a bad thing across all grape varieties? Do different grape varieties react differently to smoke taint, or is it, it's a pretty bad scenario across the board, or are there any variables with that?
Oh gosh. The problem with it is there's so many variables, believe it or not. So I mean, proximity is the number one variable. So the farther the smoke travels, the less toxic it is. Things fall out of it as it travels. It connects with moisture. If you're lucky enough to have any moisture in there, typically when we're having a big problem with the fires, not only is it very naturally dry in California, but it's the end of the summer and things are especially dry. And then the fires themselves make it even drier. So, for it to travel and find some, and we're lucky here on the coast because we get fog. So we have that moisture that's in the air every morning, which helps kind of pull the particles out of the smoke. And so we get a little bit more lucky unless there's a fire very close to us, or a fire that's actually on the coast. So not only is proximity like one of the largest issues, grape variety itself, duration, how much is exposed to the grape, the time that it's exposed. So like if it is during, heaven forbid, like veraison, it can really be uptaken into the grapes, and it's not just like kind of the ash and the smoke particles on the skin themselves. So you have two different types of smoke take: the physical kind of quality of it on the grapes, and then the uptake of the kind of the smoke into the wine, and that's kind of something that's there forever. So I mean, and those variables are very concerning. There's not enough capacity to test every vineyard. The cycle of testing the fruit for the markers for the smoke taint takes a long time to do, and there's not enough labs. So, last year we were shipping wine to Australia, we were shipping wine to Canada, we were shipping wine to Italy, we were shipping wine anywhere where we could get a test, because some insurance companies required a test that proved that there was smoke taint. And the only way to get the test, we would send in a sample and they would say, we'll have your test back to you in 6 months. And obviously we needed it back in 6 hours, to 6 days at the most, so we could make the decision on if we were going to pick the vineyard or not. So that's very frustrating and complicated, and really adds a lot to the frustration of it. And then of course the issue of whether or not the grower is insured. So, a lot of, in California, it's very common for us to not own the vineyard, and for us to be in a long-term relationship with a grower that owns a vineyard and has so many, tons of grapes available for sale, and we will contract with those. And a lot of these growers I've been dealing with for 20 years. A lot of the vineyards we've worked with today, we've been working with since our first couple of years. And not everybody, like one of my growers said, we had 20 good years and now we have a bad one. So that's a really great attitude for somebody to have. But when you have 10 tons of grapes that they sell for $5,000 a ton, it can really be financially devastating for somebody who's put a lot of money into growing those grapes. And so if they have insurance, we can say, we're not going to pick the grapes, we're going to refuse the grapes. We send them an official letter, and then they can send that letter to, so here's the contract for X amount of dollars, here's the things, the letter, the rejection letter, and they can present those to their insurance company, and hopefully they recoup some money. It's not going to be what they would have got had they harvested the grapes, obviously, but it's going to be something. And then the other circumstance would be if there's no insurance and then it's a total loss. Then it's like, well, maybe we will take some of the fruit because there's a chance we could actually make something usable. So if we don't take the fruit, it's a total loss for them and a total loss for us. But knowing that it's a total loss, we can now take that chance because we have nothing to lose at that point, because everything is already it's already a loss. So in that instance, we actually did bring some wines in, and then using some research and some kind of tricks that people have kind of had success with in the past. There's washing the fruit, there is whole cluster pressing immediately to make like a rosé, which is of course not going to be what you want to do with your best fruit from the Sonoma coast, but if you can actually get something out of it, it can be beneficial, and then that way you can actually give the grower some money. And so you've turned a total loss into something. And so that's just two of the variables. I mean, there's so many different scenarios because different insurance companies have different requirements. And so it was a brutal harvest. It was so smoky outside. I'm sitting outside at the winery. We're in West Sonoma County, a little town called Sebastopol. This is an urban winery. We're like in downtown. And this is an old apple processing facility or campus that was built right after the Second World War. And so my building was built in 1948, 49. It was constructed. And then we obviously, I mean, the bones of the building are that, and then we built the awning and put drains in and turned it into a winery. We have a distillery across from us. They have this beautiful 60-foot copper still from Germany, absolutely gorgeous. We have a coffee shop. They roast their beans and all of that. But we're right downtown, so we're not like out, we're out in the middle of nowhere. We're in. I mean, even though Sebastopol is kind of nowhere. If you've ever been here, it's a very small town.
Yeah.
But I'm looking due west. The ocean is 12 miles that way. And we were the smoke was so thick that at 9-10 o'clock in the morning, you could not tell it was daylight. It looked like it was, and that was the extreme of it. That was as bad as it got. And then we actually only had like 4 or 5 actual sunny days where we could see blue sky throughout the entire harvest. It was one fire after another. And so you can't breathe that, it's when houses burn down, there's all sorts of things in those houses that are burning. And a lot of them can be quite toxic to not only to livestock, to your pets, but to people obviously as well. So you have to have like a big mask, a very, you can wear an N95. Now we all know what N95
we're used to that now.
Yeah. Used to just be us Californians that knew what an N95 was, but now the whole world does. But we couldn't be inside because of COVID. We couldn't be outside because of the smoke. So you had one mask inside, another mask outside. So we tried to do as much as the fruit processing inside. But to be perfectly honest, it was just like we just all wanted it over. I mean, it was horrible. So, I don't know if I answered the question that was asked or what we're talking about.
Oh, more than.
2020 was a brutal harvest, and one that, we turned out some drinkable wines. One of the wines is surprisingly good. So a couple of the early whites are good. And I think the biggest problem with the wines is that you're very rushed. We're not given the luxury of allowing something to kind of mature as much as we would like. And so with the smokes happening so early in the season last year, I find a lot of the wines they're clean and they're pretty and they're proper, but they're very lean. They have a lot of acidity. They're very lean, and I'm all for a bright, fresh, clean wine, but it's got to be a little charm there. There's got to be a little fruit there. I mean, especially for the California wine, you're kind of expecting it. You want a little of that sunshine. You want a little fruit. And one of our Game's is gorgeous. One of our Game's is pretty lean. It's it's watermelon juice type thing. And one of the syrahs is the North Coast blend, which is stuff that's mostly like behind me, most of the Eastern vineyards. It's got some charm to it. The Sonoma Coast bottling is it's pretty lean. It's probably 11% alcohol, but at least we were able to bottle some things. So it wasn't a total loss. But
I feel like we should move on to something more positive, making you relive your.
Me too. Yeah, I certainly don't want to talk about it.
No, exactly. But I mean, fascinating. I knew it was going to be a complicated answer, but wow. How do you go about finding the growers to work with? Because obviously, you've got to be pretty demanding about exactly how you want your fruit to be grown and how you want it.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to very quickly interrupt just because Phil Wright asked a question that's following on from the smoke taint.
Sure.
And just wants to, I'll just do that and then we can move on to that. So it's a bit of a nerdy question, which we love. But what are the smoke markers that are often tested for? How GC question is what he was wondering.
Did he ask if there was a specific one?
Yeah, what are the
guaiacol. So there's 2 or 3 different guaiacols. And guaiacols are they're found in wine naturally, like Brettanomyces will make guaiacol. And guaiacol is that kind of barnyardy, smoky kind of non-fruity kind of quality that Brettanomyces will give. And you'll have wines, we've all had wines before that that from a producer, maybe Southern Rhone, I'll just throw out in the, whatever, and the wine is very barnyardy, and we know it's Brettanomyces, and that will show a certain guaiacol. If I believe that one is that's the ethyl guaiacol, and that is that real barnyardy thing. And then there's the other guaiacols that are kind of like narcissus flower, white flower, that you can get in a bready wine. And then there's the guaiacol that just kind of robs the wine of fruit, just kind of makes the wine a little flat. It's almost like it's almost like a wine that has a lot of that's cork tainted. And sometimes it's like, oh wow, that's cork, let's not drink that. And other times it's like, oh, is it? Oh, maybe, and it just doesn't taste good. And so guaiacols are like that as well. The ones that we get from the smoke tank can be very strong and smoky, or they can just rob the wine of fruit, or they can just be a different quality. But they test for these 3 different guaiacols in smoke tank. You guys, you have to pardon me for 1 second. I have my assistant needs a question.
All right, thank you so much for answering that. I got the big thumbs up from Phil, so definitely.
Thanks very much. Very moving. Thank you.
No, it's exactly what we're here for. I think as well, it also shows that everyone should be buying the 2018 North Coast Pax Syrah, which is on the website at the moment, because 18 and 19 are the ones to go for. And then we'll worry about 20 when it's had a few years in bottle and probably mellowed out a bit. If anyone has any other questions at this point as well, please do let us know.
Seeing winemaking live in action here. It's have to ask him for a forklift demonstration later.
Hi there, sorry.
Hey, that's all right.
It's that same old thing where we're emptying another tank and we have 30 gallons of wine that we don't have a home for, because at this time of the year we don't have any barrels left either.
Of course, yeah.
So guaiacols are what we test for with smoke tank. So I'm glad that's a good question. And what's really interesting is that a lab will give you your numbers, and your numbers can be lower from smoke tank than they can be from a barrel of new wine. So you're actually, when you age the wine in a new oak barrel, the guaiacols are what's giving the wine that oak flavor.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting that there are good guaiacols and bad guaiacols. So it's pretty fascinating. Sorry, anyways, tangent, but
no,
I think that's interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's the science behind those aromas and how they develop is it is quite fascinating. We were going to talk about your growers and how you find them. Yeah.
Well, for instance, there's Castelli Ranch and Griffin's Lair and Alder Springs and Walker Vine Hill. These are vineyards we've been working with since 2000, 2001. And those were, there wasn't a lot of Syrah in California when we were looking for those vineyards and finding them. So it's kind of a little easier, maybe. I mean, harder because there was fewer of them, but also easier because there was fewer of them.
Yeah.
And as time has gone on, it's there was a lot of Syrah getting planted in California, and some of it in the wrong places. Not wrong. I shouldn't say wrong places, because it's probably right for somebody. But not what we're after. And so I used to say in the mid 2000s that for every vineyard we buy grapes from, I've looked at 10 or 15 and said no to them, because you have to kind of see eye to eye with the grower. The grower has to be willing. So we want all of our fruit grown organically at a minimum, and we want the vineyard to be good. Hopefully have something to say. Be an interesting soil, be in an interesting location, have the correct exposition for that location. You know, the material that's used can go into play. You know, the rootstock, of course, and the scion, you know, the clone or the selection. You know, those things are less important when you have a good site, because the site is definitely going to be the overriding factor. And then for me, it's definitely the grower, the person that I'm going to be dealing with, and their willingness to be a partner in, and I don't mean that a partner in the actual sense of like, you know, a partnership, but the spirit of the partnership and kind of working together to make sure that we're both trying to achieve the same thing. It doesn't matter how great the vineyard is, how good the clone is, how good the rootstock is, how correct the exposition is. If the person is unwilling to, you know, grow the grapes organically, willing to let you drop fruit if you need to, you know, not spray certain things, you know, such on and so forth. So, you know, that kind of personality factor is very important when you're, you know, when you don't own the vineyard and you're dealing with the owner.
Do you think has it got easier to find people that are willing to work organically with those methods as time's gone on, as it's become more of a norm?
Or organic is, it used to be one of the hardest conversations I used to have with people. You know, they've just been told that you know, that the grapes are going to rot on the vine and such on and so forth. And the biggest thing, of course, used to be Roundup. You know, it was such a cheap and easy thing for people to do, that to try to convince people that there were better options. And I would give people a little package, a little folder that my wife and I would put together, and it was, you know, it said, you know, it was you know, some scientific data about, you know, how, and this is in the early 2000s, this is like 2000, 2001, 2002. You know, now this kind of information is kind of more front and center to all of us. But, you know, we used to give them these like research studies about, you know, how Roundup would cause cancer and leukemia and all these horrible things that we all know now it does. But just, you know, just in an attempt to kind of like, hey, you live here, or this is your vineyard. My dogs are in the vineyard with me when I'm working in the vineyard. My wife helps me, my friends help me, my crew helps me. And I don't want that being sprayed while if we're going to be buying the grapes. It's a non-starter for us. You know, it's like, you can stop doing that, you cannot spray, and then we will start working with the vineyard and slowly start regenerating it. But these days, it's quite a bit easier doing the organic thing. And everything's easier these days. People are, it used to be like it would be like a bidding kind of war for some vineyards. You know, people were paying, Pinot Noir producers were coming in, big money, new brands coming in looking for vineyards, trying to like buy their way in. And so that made it very difficult for us, you know, being a bootstrap business. But, you know, a lot of things have become easier. People are a little bit more chill these days about a lot of things. There's a lot more grape acreage planted. There's a lot more fruit available. It's more of a buyer's market than a seller's market. And, you know, there's big, you know, kind of following your line of questioning there, Will, there are like large grape brokerage companies that have existed in California a long time, who go around and they buy all the surplus grapes and turn it into wine and then sell that wine on the bulk market. If you have the space and the ability and the finances to do something like that, it can be very, very, very profitable. So there's companies that have existed doing that for a long time. Most of those companies do not have conventionally farmed vineyards in their portfolio. They're the ones that everybody dropped. When there started being too much bulk wine, it was like, let's just get rid of the conventional farmed vineyards and only have organic vineyards, because that's what we want to do. So a couple of big companies have made that step in the last 3 or 4 years, and that's really opening people's eyes to how, and it's easier now because of technology as well, right? I mean, there's organic products that are available for almost the same price as a conventional product. And so that makes it easier. You know, the price of entry is lower, you know, labor can be very problematic, of course, but things have gotten a little bit easier in some ways for that, for sure.
It's good news. And how was it you came across the Mission Vineyard? Was it a grape variety you were looking to seek out, or did someone tell you about it? Or
no, I was actively looking. It was probably I was in London, and I was hanging out with the Invenate guys, and Raj and I, and we were just kind of, Raj was talking about finding some, and I was just really intrigued. I loved what they were doing. I was just fascinated by it, and I'd had some examples of Mission that had been newly made in California. A gentleman named Chris Brockway from Brock Cellars. I don't know if you guys know Chris. His wines are lovely. Yeah. And then another gentleman who used to work with this vineyard as well, whose wine I'd had a couple of times in restaurants, also intriguing. So I was actively looking for some Mission, and found the vineyard that Chris Brockway was using. And then Patrick and I went out there and looked at the vineyard and just kind of asked if we could just take a big chunk of it. And lucky enough that we did in 2019. And that's the first one we made. So yeah, we were it's a wild vineyard to begin with. And
I'm just gonna quickly share my screen to show everyone some pictures of it, because it's really amazing. So hopefully this works. Here we go. That's you. Here we go. Hope everyone can see that.
Yeah. So a lot of the vines are taller than me, which is interesting. Hard to pick, clearly. And the berries themselves are large and very round. So they're very pulpy. And that pulpiness and that size of the berry means that the skin is thin. And so the color, and you can see on your screen that some of the berries are white, some of them are gray, and some of them are very dark. And so that variability is pretty common in the Mission grape as well. And you can see how sandy the vineyard is in that other picture. It's this is an old river bottom. And what's really fascinating about this is, I like to, when I'm looking at a vineyard, it's like, I want to ask a lot of questions, but the most important thing for me is, of course, to go to the vineyard, obviously, and walk the vineyard and see it for myself and feel it and see that it's got the good energy and it has, the potential of something that I think is going to be good, and what the exposition is and all of this stuff. And it was like, okay, well, what's the address? And it was this very long, convoluted conversation that we continually had with this grower. And it was like they were keeping it a secret. And it was very frustrating for us, because typically it's like you can pull something up on Google Maps, or you can map something, or you can, it's, the world we live in makes things like this relatively easy these days. And it was this constant kind of back and forth of, well, you got to go, it's like, and so anyways, the long and short of this is that the vineyard is behind this house. And you pull down the driveway, and then you park your car, and then you walk towards the river, where you can see where the river is, because there's the trees. And as you walk to the river, you kind of come around to this spot where there's a cliff, and the cliff is about 40 feet down, and you get to the edge of the cliff, and there's the vineyard. So the vineyard is below sea level. And there's no way you can find this vineyard. It's like it's down in this huge kind of turn in the river. So the river took this path for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and then changed direction at some point and left this huge kind of cutout, and you can see it on the satellite map. And this weird kind of cutout that was carved out of this of the earth is now flat, and somebody planted this mission vineyard there. It's originally planted in the 40s, and then replanted over time. And some of the vines, the healthiest part of the vineyard we found was actually planted in the 80s. But it's all mixed together.
Is it all mission packs, or is there some other stuff there? Or
it looks like there was probably like the only thing that, so Carignan grows very similar to Mission. The biggest difference is the color of the berries. And we've seen some vines that we think could be Carignan in there, but they're very few and far between. It's not like a Zinfandel vineyard where they would intentionally kind of mix things up into the vineyard to get some, you have mix in some white grape, and that was just kind of what they would do intentionally, for the not for like a field blend necessarily, where it was kind of done more intentionally. It's just like some white grapes are in there and some accidents are made and that sort of thing, and they kind of give you this or give you that. This is pretty, this would seem to be laid out and planted pretty well. And this is the original owner. It used to be called the Disney Vineyard because the person that planted the vineyard was an artist for the Walt Disney Studio in Los Angeles.
Wow.
And again, it's kind of always been a little bit of a mystery too, because you can't just drive up to it. You drive up to this and there's nothing there. You have to like walk down this path to get to this edge of this cliff where you can see they've built in this like switchback road to get down the tractors down to the bottom. I mean, it's really quite fascinating.
Wow.
I'd never seen anything like it.
And like you're saying, it's quite a wild vineyard, isn't it? I mean, do you train the vines at all, or you just let them sort of do their own thing? And
no, there's no. I mean, I think the cool thing to call this would be Fukuoka method, but in reality, it's just nothing is actually done in the vineyard at all.
Fantastic. And then in terms of the wine, because it's what everyone's probably got in their glass at the moment. Do you want to talk us through, how you go about making it? What's the philosophy behind it? Yeah.
So in tasting a lot of the wines and researching the variety and that sort of thing, the things that the things that are the biggest concern and having the wine is pretty clear. There's a very weird tannin structure to the wine, and that has a lot to do with the skins. And so if you think of, I think Mission, and this is kind of an odd thing to say, but Mission has a lot in common with Nebbiolo. They have one very distinct thing different, but they have a lot in common. They both have thin skins that are exceptionally tannic. They are both very prone to volatile acidity. So as soon as you cut a cluster of Nebbiolo off the vine, you can smell the volatile acidity in the wine. Mission is very similar to that in a way. The biggest difference, I think, between Nebbiolo and Mission is the acidity. Nebbiolo has a very high natural acidity. Mission has a very, very low natural acidity. So here we have this grape variety. And so this is the magic of Nebbiolo. And I know this isn't a Nebbiolo discussion, but the reason why Nebbiolo works is because it has so much natural acidity that the wine can be aged for the tannins to soften. Yeah. So Mission doesn't have that. You have this fiercely tannic grape variety with no acidity. So for me, I figured, well, we pick it super early so that we have natural acidity, which is the most important thing with wine, in my opinion. Like, people always talk about, and I was guilty of saying this when I was much younger and making this mistake, But when you're walking through a vineyard and deciding when to pick, everybody's always talking about what the grapes taste like. Well,
Yeah.
I'm not in the grape business, you know, I'm in the wine business, and all that wine is chemistry. I mean, yes, there's heart and soul and love and, you know, magic and all that good stuff too. But the reality of wine is it needs a good chemistry in order for it to taste good. You know, if the Raveneau brothers didn't care about pH and acidity, you know, we wouldn't know their names right now, right? Because it's just that wine is, as for as magical it is, it's very technical. And so with the mission, it's like, let's pick this at a very, very early in the growing season. We know it's going to be light in color, but we're going to have natural acidity, and that's going to be the most important thing that we can do for this wine. And so knowing that picking it early with high natural acidity, we're going to have very low alcohol, potential alcohol, and we're going to have very, very underripe tannins. So what we decided to do was to have a very short maceration. And what we did is we brought the grapes in. We didn't crush any of them. We put them in a big vat, pumped in a little fermenting grape juice. And this fermenting grape juice is acts as the mother, kind of like a pied de couve, I suppose. And then as the berries are going into the tank, some burst, some of the riper berries burst, and this is kind of releasing the sweet juice. And so you're kind of creating this old time kind of natural carbonic maceration. And so we did a short carbonic maceration because we didn't want the wine to be too bubblegummy. We really wanted this wine to taste like Mission, but we wanted to do at least a third to a half of the maceration inside the berry to have lower tannin. So then what we did is after we kind of thought we got a good partial kind of carbonic kind of happening, we drain the juice out, we pull all the grapes out, we step on them all, put them back in the tank, kept the juice separate, and then did a 2-day normal fermentation with those grapes that had just gone through carbonic maceration, immediately drained off the other kind of cut of that juice, and then pressed the rest and had a third cut. So we had this infused kind of, you know, the first cut of wine that is exposed to the outside of the berries, which can be quite tannic and dark. And then you have the fermented stuff, which is going to have more of the carbonic quality and more kind of volume and body and depth. And then the final piece, the stuff that was pressed, is you know, sometimes lighter in color, can also be a little bit more tannic. And then we just and then I also did one tank where I just treated it like I would treat Syrah or Pinot Noir, and just hopped in, crushed the berries by foot, put it in a concrete tank, and just kind of pumped it over a couple times a day for the fermentation. So just kind of a very traditional, old school kind of Burgundian kind of fermentation. And then I kept that slot separate as well, just to kind of learn more the first year. And then when we were going to put the barrels together, so Patrick and I just picked the vineyard, and then we just kind of went through, and I was like, well, I like this. And he's like, well, I don't like that. I'm like, okay. So the kind of the Burgundian, I took all of that. He really liked the stuff that was more carbonic, so he took all of that. And then we kind of took other barrels and switched back and forth and kind of made our wines from the components that we had created together. And sometimes when you have the wines side by side, sometimes they taste too similar, and sometimes when you have them, you can tell the difference. But all picked on the same day. And then in 20, which the Mission was really great. I didn't take any in 20. I was worried about smoke. We took a little for Patrick, and his wine's fabulous. It's the best wine we've made off the vineyard. And then 21, I'm not sure about it yet. It's in tank still. It's okay. We'll see. You never know. But you know, Missions, it's it's a very finicky grape. I guess it's a lot like, you know, that's another thing it has in common with Nebbiolo, because of those thin skins. You know, it's really, you really got to kind of pick it at the right time, and then you got to, you know, you got to handle it right. And I don't know, it just seems like something isn't quite as, I mean, the 20, it was really dark in the tank. It was very fruity in the tank. And then when the wine was completed, it just had this, it had all of the kind of fuzzy edges that Mission has, and that kind of wild, kind of exotic irony kind of quality and the aromatics. But it had this like volume to it. It had this like, it has this really good fruit, which the 19 and I really love the 19 for its kind of classic kind of quality and nature to it. And hopefully the 21 kind of starts picking some of that up. But but yeah, that's grape growing, and that's especially with something as finicky as Mission. And you know, that's, you know, Mission was you know, it was you know, for many years, the reason it exists still to this day is because it was they made a dessert wine out of it, you know, by Angelica, by adding brandy to it and kind of fortifying it. So without that kind of that quality and that that desire to do that, or the kind of classic kind of quality of doing that, then it really probably wouldn't exist anymore, because it's not a, it's a very finicky table wine.
Yeah. What I find fascinating though, Pax, is what you were saying about how you are picking for acidity, but it's the winemaking where you're controlling the tannin, whereas a lot of sort of, I suppose, an older school philosophy of winemaking is you know, you wait until your tannins are ripe on the vine, but I suppose then you're losing your acidity and the wine becomes...
It depends on the vineyard. You know, we have you know, before when we were initially talking, I was telling you guys about that, the last Syrah vineyard we brought in. I mean, you know, we let that hang. I mean, we've picked that in the middle of November before, you know, and the potential alcohol was still under 12. And so that was all about, you know, finding that balance between where we're just dropping acidity and we are, you know, where the ripeness we're getting each day is not beneficial because we're losing acidity. Now, some other vineyards, it's, you know, sometimes we don't have that opportunity in California, you know, because of the sunshine, because of how dry it is, because of how much sunshine and heat and you know, because it's California, sometimes we don't have that opportunity. And you know, not to talk too much shit, but you know, in Napa or in other kind of classic wine growing regions in California, they just pick at whatever they want, and then they just add acid and add everything to the wine and de-alkalize and do all of that. And that's perfectly fine. I'm not, you know, throwing stones. It's just a different way of doing it. And my first wines, that's exactly how I did it, because that is the California way. You know, you pick something extremely ripe, you add a lot of acid, you add water, bleed that off, you know, put it in new oak, and voila, you have a California wine. We've all tasted those wines. They're boring as hell, you know, and when you make the decision that you're going to, you know, not add acidity, not add acid from a bag, you're not going to add nutrients, you're not going to de-alkalize it, you're not going to water it back. You know, when you make that decision, you start becoming very aware of how important it is to have a good vineyard, because without without the right soils and the right everything, without that, you have to augment it. And so, you know, so for us, picking on acidity is the most important thing, because I don't want to add acid. I would rather have a wine that was slightly underripe, or heaven forbid, slightly overripe, than having to you know, have to add acid from a bag. It just, to me, it just doesn't, it's not what I'm looking for.
Does that influence your use of sulfur as well? If you have a, you know, that more acidic wine, is that affecting your use there?
Oh heavens, yes, of course. I mean, you know, if I mean, acidity is a you know, it's a great balancer. It's a great, you know, it protects the wine. You know, without the acidity, the wine You know, if you have a wine, if we have a Chenin Blanc that is, you know, 3.3 pH when it's finished, you know, I can put 10 parts of sulfur in that and never have to put anything in it again. If that wine has a pH of 3.8, I have to put 10 times the amount of sulfur to get the same sort of protection that I'm getting. So pH is a big driving factor into how effective sulfur dioxide is in wine. And then the beauty of a wine that has a lot of acidity is you usually don't even have to add sulfur at all. And so, you know, all of those factors go into play. And also, you know, another factor that you learn is that having a fermentation that completes with, you know, to total dryness, you know, the wine has less microbial issues. And when I was young and just starting out, I wanted these big, ripe, big wines, and we were picking them, and then you have these issues. So, you know, when you find these, whether these vineyards I'm working with now, you know, you pick them, they have a lovely pH, they have naturally low alcohol, so the fermentation finishes. So it's like the whole thing is just such a more healthy kind of thing to begin with, that, you know, we don't have to add yeast, we don't have to add anything to extract anything because it's been hanging. We don't have to add, you know, we don't have to add any nutrients because the sugar is low enough, but it's ripe so that it ferments naturally and to completion. So there's no microbial issues. We don't have to add sulfur because there's no microbial issues. We don't have to add if we do have to add sulfur, we don't have to add very much because we have natural acidity. So yeah, all of those things are, you know, very opposite of what is standard in California, and and so much easier. I mean, it's remarkable how much. I mean, if it works out, you know, we have problem lots this year in the cellar, of course, and you know, that's because of one thing or the other. Maybe a mistake that we made in the cellar, or a mistake in the vineyard, or something. But you know, those things are few and far between when you are working with when you're working with a more healthy environment of things.
I'm sure anyone here that's tried your syrahs as well, you know, knows they're incredibly pure, fresh style. I know you're quite keen on drinking them quite cold, aren't you? Your syrahs, or
yeah.
I know us English are we're guilty for warming up our wines a bit before drinking them, but yeah, I mean, there's nothing quite like a nice chilled glass of syrah every so often.
I love it. I mean, you know, it's, you know, I mean, even when it's, I mean, I mean, you know, I guess there's very few things. Well, I mean, I love iced coffee and I like hot coffee. I love iced tea and I love hot tea, but I don't like lukewarm tea or like room temperature tea necessarily. You know, if I'm having a glass of water, I like it cold. Maybe I think it's a little different on the other side of the ocean. Or you know, but there's very few things I think that are supposed to be drunk room temperature. And room temperature in California is, of course, much different than it is in the UK.
Unfortunately, so yeah.
So, you know, so if my room temperature is, you know, 82 degrees, you know, heavens forbid, I would hate to drink a Syrah at 80 degrees. You know, I think it needs to be 65 at least, or colder for me. But I think it just tastes better. So yeah, I'm guilty of drinking my wine too cold. But that's the way I like it. So I have no apologies to be made.
Has it always been that way, Pax? Because I know when I try some of the older syrahs that you've made, there's definitely a difference in style, and they've definitely evolved over the years and become brighter and fresher. Is that fair? Or
yeah, for sure, definitely. Oh, for sure. You know, it's finding that balance, right? I mean, you know, I would have argued when I was 28 years old when I started the winery. So, you know, when I was drinking, you know, like La Landone and you know, La Moline, and you know, my idea of what, you know, I needed to make in California is I want these wines to be purely California, and you know, I would go taste with Thierry Allemande or Jean-Louis Chave, and you know, I was convinced in walking these vineyards with them as a 28, 29-year-old man that they would do the same thing if they were in my shoes, you know, because they would want to get all of this. And then as kind of time wore on, I kind of realized that just because you can doesn't mean you should, and that there's something that the wines I wanted to drink had more freshness. And what if we, didn't buy from that volcanic hillside, above Napa that we needed to pick at 16 degrees potential in order to have the wine be ripe, like physiologically ripe enough. Like maybe if we found things that were a little cooler and things that were, going to be ripe at a much lower potential alcohol, those sort of things kind of started dawning on me. And then realizing that hey, maybe we don't need to pick it quite this ripe. Maybe we can pick it a little less ripe and still make a wine that's just as good. And then, then you maybe we can, I mean, all of those things are lessons in the step and the evolution. I mean, it's like, I always say this, I don't know if this is a good analogy, but it's one that always comes to mind. It's like if you are shaving your face or your legs and you cut yourself because you didn't put soap on them, you're going to put soap on them. You change what you do. I think the difference between humans and animals is that we change. You know what I mean? We every single day. I mean, we evolve. Every time I walk in the door, I stub my toe. I'm gonna step over that this time. I think winemaking is people always talk to me about winemaking like there's this big cultural shift that we are doing or something. In reality, it's just trying not to make the same mistakes again and just evolving to do better. I think it's as simple as not stubbing your toe.
Such an excellent,
if I could.
Such an excellent point. Yeah. I'm just going to very quickly interrupt because the wonderful Malcolm would love to ask you a question, Pax. So I'm just going to unmute him.
Great.
So bear with me 1 second. Slight delay.
Pax, thanks very much. This is fascinating.
Yes.
But I came across some of your wines because unfortunately somebody had to sell their cellar, and their cellar was full of quite a lot of your wines. And so this was in London, and I picked one up on New Year's Eve last year, and it was a 2005 Griffin's Lair, which I thought was absolutely fabulous. Now, the style of your wine seems to have changed. And then you put me in touch very kindly, and I must say your response to my email was brilliant, you and your associates. And you put me in touch with Indigo, put me in touch with Will, and then I managed to pick up 39 bottles of Alder Springs, the 2013, which again I thought was, well, and actually Will was giving it away, actually. He was selling it far too cheaply.
Can I buy it back, Malcolm?
So I mean, they're very different. The Syrahs were a very different style to the Sonoma hillsides and the North Coast, which you produce now. And they were very alcoholic, almost black in color, and at the bottom, big heavy bottles, sludge at the bottom, and an explosion of fruit. And so actually, if I go to the Alder Springs, which I got 39 bottles of, on the back it says only 96 cases. So these are tiny quantities of wine, which again I think makes them quite special. And so so there were things like Griffin's Lair, but the Kobler family, Russian River, Magic Vineyard, Cuvée Kelty, Cuvée Christina, Walker Vineyard, Alder Springs, and I've got probably 100 bottles or so between 2002 and 2007, and you can't get hold of them now, apart from sort of this poor chap who's having to sell his cellar. But now I think your Sonoma hillside, I think, is a combination of four of those vineyards, and
it can be.
So I just wonder if you can just talk me through a bit more that sort of development of your wines and how the Syrahs have altered, and whether you think they're better, because I think they're very different, but I'm not sure. I love the earlier wines.
Have you had any recent vintages of those same vineyards? Like, have you had a 2015 Griffin's Lair?
No, because I can't. No, I don't think I can get hold of it. I bought what
Okay.
have I got? Some 2014 Griffin's Lair.
I think it's 14 you picked up. Yeah.
Yeah, I got the 2014 Griffin's Lair, not the 15.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, those wines are much bigger and more concentrated than the blends. And of course, the North Coast Syrah, it's all of the leftovers. You know, it's the things that don't get bottled as a vineyard designated wine, or things that don't get chosen for the Sonoma Hillsides. Sonoma Hillsides is a barrel selection of things that we have lower tannins that we think are going to be more enjoyable early. And then the vineyard designated wines are the best barrels from any given vineyard. And sometimes the wines aren't bottled in any given vintage, but I think the 2005 wines are lovely. I think the biggest difference, Malcolm, between the 2005s and the 15, 16, 17, 18, and on for whether we're talking Griffin's Lair or Alder Springs or Castelli Night Ranch, is there's less new oak and there's slightly less rye. And because of that, I do think that the wines are better. They might be slightly less impactful, but for me, I think they're more true to Syrah and they're less about me and more about the grape and the vineyard. You know, it used to be, I wanted them to be very, I mean, and I like a big, rich wine, but I think the wine can be big and rich and still not be overbearing. And I certainly don't think that the 05 Griffin's Lair is overbearing. I think that wine is lovely. That was a very good balance of concentration and freshness. And that vineyard does that very well because it's very, very close to the San Pablo Bay and very close to the Pacific Ocean. And so the cooling of that vineyard allows us to kind of do that. You know, I think that maybe we overdid it a little in 02 from Griffin's Lair, maybe 03. Definitely 04. It was kind of the point where, you know, the kind of the one that was kind of a little too much. And then 5, we had a really nice cool vintage, and the wines I think really kind of fell into line. And in Alder Springs, whether we're talking about a 2004 or 2005, you know, Alder Springs, those wines all tint except for one, the 2003, which was very high in alcohol. We had some heat spikes right before we picked, but all the Alder Springs wines, regardless of the vintage and style that we've made, all have a real delicacy to them, a real lightness. It's because the vineyard is very high elevation. It's because the vineyard is planted in sandstone, the soil that's very, you know, transparent and very pretty. So, I mean, I think that that the vineyard designated wines are still quite a step above, you know, the blended wines, and that's intentional, you know, and there's sometimes there's even less and less of them. I mean, you know, the 18 and 19 Magic Vineyard. I mean, how, you know, I'll have to bring some next time I come and open one for you. You know, I think there's only like 1 or 2 barrels of those made total. My computer says I have to plug it.
2005. I've got the 2005 Magic, which is very, very good.
Oh yes, I love that wine. That wine is very cool.
And can you just give us a bit of advice before I sort of drop off? Can you give us a bit of advice on, you know, how long you should decant your wines before we drink them? I've sort of found the longer they're decanted, the better they come.
Look, you know, I'm you know, it's funny. I think that I don't disagree with you. I think that with decanting, the wines can show you more. But I think that, you know, when you go to a fireworks display, you know, that's very common in America. You know, you there's the grand finale, right? And it's like everything is building up to this moment, and then it's like, oh my gosh. Well, I mean, you can go to the fireworks display and ignore the show and just show up for the grand finale, or you can, or, you know, the final scene of a play, maybe. You know, it's like, you know, I think that as the wine is opening up, it's telling you a story. And I think that if you decant a wine and you let it sit on a counter for 2 hours, I think you're missing half of the show. And I think that it may taste better. It may reach this moment of, after it's been decanted for 2 hours, of being superior, but again, the only way to know that is to see the evolution of it. And so, I mean, I love a wine when it's, I love like, not to talk about, to bring up Chablis all the time, but it's like, I love that tension when a Chablis is just open. Man, do they get great after being open for an hour? For sure, you know, especially a young Ravenna or Dovesat. But I love that kind of, that experiencing the whole show of that. So I don't really think that I think that the wines can be, I really like the process of leaving a bottle standing up, and this is called double decanting. You pull the cork, you pour it cleanly into a decanter, you rinse the bottle out with water, and you pour the decanted wine back in, and then you can serve that wine. That wine has been dumped into a canter, then dumped back into the bottle. And in my opinion, that's the best way to handle my wines. That the wines, you know, after 20 minutes, by the time you set it on the table and get your food ready or whatever, by the time you do that, I think that the wines are in a perfect place. They haven't sat open for too long in a stagnant state. You know, you've given them this nice kind of aerative kind of racking. And I think it just really opens the wines up great. And that's what I do. And that's how I serve them. If I were to have you come to the winery, that's how I would prepare the wines before I serve them to you.
Okay,
it's a lovely analogy. I'm definitely stealing that one. That's. Does anyone else have any? Oh, go on.
No, I would just always read these things about, you know, people opening the wines and like, you know, we let that wine sit on the tap. I decanted at 8 o'clock in the morning, and at midnight it was great. It's like,
you get a better understanding of a wine as well. I feel if you drink it as it develops in the glass, you kind of you get the whole story, don't you, rather than
I think so,
just a snapshot. But it's interesting. I've never thought about that before. That's yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? I realize we've hit the hour, so if anyone's got any questions they want to, you know, just feel free to unmute yourselves and ask away.
I suppose, well, how do we get hold of your single vineyard wines, Pax? Because it's so difficult to access them and get them across to the UK. You know, can Will have some sort of special arrangement whereby he gets some priority in terms of some of your single vineyard wines? We'd love that in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, I think, yes, he can. You know, what we would have to do is just make sure that that a list is given to Will, and that list is then shared with you, so that you could perhaps kind of do a pre-arrival sort of situation. You know, I don't think that I don't think that I think there's a balance between what we offer and what they're able to take. So finding that kind of balance for somebody like you, Malcolm, is certainly very doable, for sure. It's just going to take a couple of extra steps, but I'm happy to do that for somebody like you who can rattle off these names of the vineyards like that. So yes.
We'll talk after, Malcolm. Okay. I think the ones that don't end up in my cellar can go to you, Malcolm. That's the.
Well, Will, I'll send you across some of Pax's sort of early wines if you haven't tasted them, because it's quite interesting. So
it's a deal. It's a deal. We'll do a swap. Oh, definitely. Any other questions from anyone else, or? No, I think we've covered a lot in an hour. That's quite.
Sorry, I was just going on and on.
No, it's fascinating.
It was amazing, Pax. Thank you so much.
And I think it's a really enjoyable wine, really enjoyable. And Bridget was saying she enjoys it.
I just saw that. Yeah, I just turned on the chat. But me too, Bridget, especially the Mission. You know, I think the tannins are more focused. I think the wine is prettier. I think I like the way it smells. And you know what I also really like about the 19 Mission is if it has a nice chill on it, you're kind of hard pressed to tell it's a red wine at all. It has all these like really pretty floral kind of quality. The tannins are really softened, and I mean I think that wine is a great example of why you should drink a light red wine cold. Sometimes it's a preference, but in this one I think it just tastes better. I mean,
yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
Completely agree. I think it's been a great one to have in our wine club case because it is such. It's not a wine people naturally go for. You know,
Right.
to be able to force people to drink it. To try
Well,
it.
Hopefully you only have to force them once though, right? I mean,
oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I just need to make sure I have enough of it. Otherwise I'll have Malcolm on my door again, asking me to get some more.
I love it. Awesome. Thanks, Malcolm.
No, brilliant.
You keep hitting them.
Yeah, keep nagging me. It's been really interesting, Pax, and really appreciate your time over the last hour. I'm sure everyone's found it fascinating. I hope
so.
Cool.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Pax. Thank you so much, everyone. We recorded this session as well, so I'll be able to send you all a link. So if there's anything you missed, you want to revisit, you can definitely do that. And Pax, thanks as well for giving us such a great insight into the goings on in your cellar.
Crazy.
You're really seeing it now, aren't we? Yeah, exactly.
It's brilliant. Thank you so much.
That's why I was outside, so that we could,
Amazing.
We have a lot going on today.
Thank you. Well, hopefully we'll get to see you soon.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you so much. Yeah, I hope to see you soon. Nice to see you all. Okay.
Well, thanks, everyone.
You so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.